Good afternoon and welcome to the COMIT virtual happy hour. Thank you very much for joining us today. Those that have joined us before, this is a place for a friendly chat over hot topics and with preferably a beverage in hand. Okay, so today's topic. We're running the session slightly differently. We'll have a brief intro and then we'll go into a discussion with Richard and Paul, two construction technology veterans, Richard Scott and Paul Wilkinson, and we'll discuss the need for data interoperability, the role that platform solutions can play, and the underlying need for standardisation within the AECO sector. And we will then be answering the questions that came in through registration, and also questions from the floor, which I'll get to in a second. I'd like to say thank you for the questions of registration. We'll get to those at the end, but these are the results. We'll go through those individually. But a little bit firstly about COMIT. Those that are new to this, I just need to give you a little bit of background about what COMIT is. COMIT is a community that's made up of owners, operators, contractors, solution providers, and academia. We have a history of developing and running projects and webinars with a focus on increasing productivity for better outcomes. As is often said, the best improvements come from a combination of knowledge, people, process, and technology. And by being collaborative with all of our stakeholders, we create value and enablement through process improvement, and by setting up the all-important demonstration projects. Before I go any further, I do try to keep the acronyms to an absolute minimum, or I'll explain them as I go. But even as a seasoned professional, I still hear these acronyms that I've never even heard of in construction. I think some people make them up. So I want to just talk a little bit about COMIT. We run community days. We normally operate on 4 of those a year. We run regular webinars. I've got a couple of examples of those next. Projects, there's no better way to early adoption than proving it in the field. We have a drone community, which is a separate project in itself. It started out as a small project with a working community. And we do partner with other organisations as well. And in addition to all that, we run events. We haven't had any for a couple of years for obvious reasons, but next year we're planning on a conference in central London. So, webinars. I mentioned that if I could just click on the next slide. Oh, it's jumped through several slides, I beg your pardon. If it just stabilizes, I might be able to give you the right slide. Okay, so webinars. We run these every 2 to 4 weeks. It's at this time on the Friday. All the projects, all the past webinars that we've done are held on the COMIT homepage. I mentioned about the drones. The drone community has its own website and its own membership base. And the projects, this is a current project as one example. COMIT indeed has a pedigree of setting up and running these projects, and this is one project that we got off the ground earlier this year and is open to new participants. If anybody's interested in getting involved in that, reach out. So, on to today's session. We usually say at this point, welcome to the team. And I did have to actually look up the definition of a team earlier because we have a duo here, but we're fine. And these two fine gentlemen that are in front of you today, it would be rude for me not to describe them as industry stalwarts and our very own subject matter experts. So welcome to Richard and Paul, and I'm going to individually let them introduce themselves. So over to Paul and Richard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Yes, I'm Paul Wilkinson. I've got a couple of slides which I'll just quickly share in a moment, but firstly, just to give some context, Richard and I known each other for the best part of 20 years. What we're going to try to do in this session is keep it light and conversational, hopefully interesting, informative, and thought-provoking. Hopefully thought-provoking enough that you can ask some questions. There is a facility in the chat window to ask questions as they occur to you during the session. Richard, do you want to quickly just say hello?
Yes, certainly. So, Stuart, thanks very much for the introduction. It's really great to see COMIT go from strength to strength. Yeah, so I'm Richard Scott. I started working in the construction technology space around about 2000. I was always involved in technology. I was developing software, and I was fascinated by mobile technology, mobile computers. And just around about that time, Palm Pilots were on the scene. For those of us who are old enough to remember Palm Pilots, it seems to be more and more often now I speak to people about that brand and they say, well, I've never heard of it. I think it's a reflection of our age. And I had a call from a construction MD, and he said to me, I want to put mobile computers on the construction site. So yeah, I've had a long journey since that point, starting to take the whole idea of using mobile technology in live construction environments for capturing information electronically at the point of activity in a construction environment. I built that business over 14 years and saw the product evolve quite significantly, and the customer base, of course, as well. And I sold that company to Viewpoint. It was acquired by Viewpoint in 2014. And of course, Paul, you know, Viewpoint is the people behind for projects and so on. Went to work with a few other companies within the construction space, spent some time with Viewpoint, of course, and that was a great experience for me, learning a lot more about other technology platforms and products, particularly CDEs and some early BIM tools. Then I went and worked for Think Project for a little while, which was equally interesting and fascinating. Learned a lot about contract management, evolution of BIM, and other perspectives on sort of common data environments and CDEs. And of course now I work for Archdesk as VP of Global Partnerships. So yeah, I think Stuart's probably right in calling us veterans, right? We've been around a long time, Paul, I think, both of us. Yeah. We've seen a lot of change in the industry over sort of the best part of 20 years. And yeah, hopefully we're qualified to sort of talk a little bit about our experiences and what interoperability and platform technology means and why it's important and how we can go about sort of achieving some of the sort of objectives of, you know, some of the ambitions of these technologies, you know, in the working environment.
Great. I'm going to just ask Stuart just to let me share a couple of slides. So let me just put these up on screen.
You're still seeing notes, Paul?
Yeah, do it the other way around. I have to reset it each time.
That's all right. It's good now.
So Richard's given an introduction to himself. I run a technology consultancy. I've been a freelance now for the past 11, 12 years now. But I started in the industry more than 30 years ago now, and I've been working in the IT sector for most of the last 25 years. And amongst other things, I'm chair of the technology group of the UK BIM Alliance. That arose because Anne Kemp had identified that I had worked with a lot of what we then called collaboration technology providers. I'd written a book about that area, which led me then to start writing a blog, and that led to some freelance journalism and other stuff. So very active in that area. And the thing I'm particularly involved with at the moment is an organisation called the Government and Industry Interoperability Group, or the GIG. And I lead a work stream on technologies and openness. And as you could gather by the name of the GIG, the focus there is very much on interoperability. If I go back to my early days in the IT sector, one of the things that was flagged very strongly 20 years ago now was the high cost of poor interoperability. there was a well-known study in America from the NIST, which is the equivalent of the UK's National Physical Laboratory, and it conservatively estimated that the annual cost of inadequate in interoperability was $15 billion per annum, most of which was borne by the industry's clients. But a third of that cost was actually borne by the industry itself. And a lot of that came down to the cost of avoiding poor interoperability, mitigating the impacts of poor interoperability, or the cost of delay. Another survey a few years later quantified some of those impacts, suggesting that poor interoperability added about 3% to project costs and extended project schedules by about 3%. And I think there are many organisations in the industry, including the civil service, who've looked at the costs of poor interoperability in terms of productivity in the workplace. There are some civil servants, according to the National Audit Office, who spend 60 to 80% of their time trying to overcome the issues of poor quality and poorly connected data. So that's really what we're going to be talking a lot about this afternoon. Roll forward 2 to 3 years ago. We've obviously had more than 20 years of understanding the impacts of poor interoperability, and the government, in line with many other major client organisations, has increasingly started to look at embracing technology and, in particular, embracing open standards. So the BIM interoperability expert group produced a report in just over 2 years ago, in March 2020, which identified a number of interoperability enablers. And that's really what the GIG, the Government and Industry Interoperability Group, is now doing. It's picked up the baton from the BAIG group and is pushing forward, intending to support UK government strategy, which is demanding greater sharing of better data, as it's described in the UK construction, as the construction playbook, and also better whole life outcomes, a consistent theme there with the TIP roadmap. So that's really where we're focusing our conversation today, is around interoperability. We'll talk about different definitions of interoperability, but before I open that up back to Richard, I just thought I'd share one definition, which is the one that's shared by the GIG. Anybody that was perhaps at Digital Construction Week earlier this year might have seen the exhibition stand that we had at that show. And the GIG defines interoperability as the ability to exchange and use information securely, ensuring that information is independent of the technologies used to deliver it. So this is about being information centric and technology agnostic. And the reason that we're aiming to do that is because it's really that final point on the screen there. It's about information longevity. It's about enabling asset owner operators and other parties in the built environment to access and use information throughout the whole asset lifecycle. So that's really the context in which I approach interoperability. But I'll come off sharing now, and perhaps we can then hand back to Richard. I'll ask Richard then to talk a little bit more from his perspective about what he sees as interoperability.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think that's a really good sort of, insight and starting point for us. I think, the word interoperability, I think generally it's applied to IT systems, right? But it can also be applied to sort of, other domains as well. But from the perspective of computer systems and the ability for computer systems to interoperate, as you said, it's this idea that one independent computer system can connect to another independent computer system without any kind of human interaction and share data and information. And I think this can be done in a number of different ways, with different levels of sophistication. The ability just to send a file from one system to another without anybody having to sort of, intervene or control that process, and for one system to be able to read that and just understand that, the contents of that file is one level of interoperability, and that's often called sort of syntactic interoperability. But the idea that you can send information from one system to another, and it can read the data, and it can understand what I need to do with this data, is just another level above that, and that's called semantic interoperability. And I think our industry is really moving towards this kind of idea of semantic interoperability, right? And the only way that can truly work is if both systems have some kind of common information exchange model that allows them to understand the context of this data that's being exchanged. And I think what's really interesting in terms of where are we today, you look at, as I said earlier on, I started in this industry at the turn of the century, it's just the turn of 2000, off the back of the Hackett report, the Egan report, right? And it was really interesting at that point, because when I was talking to the industry at that point, what I was hearing was, we've just put in our accountancy systems. And I think that was almost, Paul, like the first wave of kind of technology adoption within construction. And we were just about to put in our document management systems, which was the second wave of technology adoption. And since then we've had quality control systems and scheduling systems. But I think what's interesting is these independent, sort of best-in-class kind of solutions that are out there today, which are used extremely well, do a fantastic job of what they're doing. They were built for a specific purpose, and we touched on this in the last conversation, didn't we? As you said, I think the accountancy system was built for accountants, and the scheduling system was built for the schedulers, and the quality control system for the quality engineers, and so on. And I think at that point they didn't really have any concept of these products and might need to exchange information. And we've reached a point now, and this is what we're hearing, within Archdesk almost every day. Every customer that we speak to, every business that we speak to, is focused on one thing, and that is, how can we mine more value by joining these systems together so that we can see a bigger picture, so that we can understand, we can gain more context. And these things are meant to connect, right? So if you just take the idea of kind of, an accountancy system understands costs, and the quality system understands quality and defects and NCRs and non-conformances and so on, and the scheduling system understands time. But there's a cost related to quality, all right? So it's right that sort of quality systems should be attached to accountancy systems or cost control systems. There is a cost associated with schedule delays, and there could be quality impacts as a result of scheduling delays. So these things are inherently interactive. But I think that the way that we've looked at that kind of interactivity up until recently has really been kind of a lot of manual effort and intellectual endeavor. And I think the change that we've seen in the sort of technology landscape allows us to think a little bit more creatively and a little bit more sophisticatedly, if you like, about how we can get these systems to connect. And it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges has been, if we go back, to when I started in industry, we were still largely working on drawing boards. We were still delivering paper-based outputs, and the early software tools that we started to use weren't designed to deliver shared content in the way that we now understand it. They were created to help deliver the outputs. So they were delivering better drawings more quickly, drawings that could be edited, so that versions could be updated without completely redrawing the item, so that and schedules were done the same. It was all about producing information that could then be shared in a paper-based form.
Exactly.
Roll forward to where we are now. We still have some of those same challenges in that lots of people are still thinking in terms of outputs. But this is all, there is a slightly bigger picture here in that the silo-based mentality of the industry also has hampered sharing of information. We've tended to have a knowledge is power approach, where we clutch information close to ourselves and only share the minimum amount that's necessary, lest we lose our competitive advantage or inadvertently share some intellectual property. And so we're very conservative about our sharing, have been traditionally very conservative about sharing our information, and we haven't been encouraged through many of the contracts, which are still often quite adversarial, to be collaborative, to be sharing, to be to work together towards mutual goals. We're still thinking in our own individual silos, and I think that's been a big problem, and one of the reasons that poor interoperability has been allowed to perpetuate compared to, for example, the manufacturing sector, where they've had integrated supply chains for much longer than construction has. And we're still at an early stage in integrating supply chains.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And I think the whole topic of interoperability sort of almost goes beyond technology as well. We talked about computer systems sharing data and information, but interoperability sort of exists between sort of functions and departments, and between supply chain and subcontractors and clients and other parties to the project. If I think about the early work that we were doing on site, essentially what we were doing there was trying to enable interoperability between the operations that are happening in the live construction environment. I call it where the hard hats and the muddy boots exist, and the back office. It was an aspect of interoperability, right? It was bridging two domains that were normally bridged using pieces of paper, all right, and to deliver that in a more effective way. And I think it's really important that what can you achieve by good interoperability? I think, as you said, it's about breaking down silos. It's about trying to create an environment where the whole business can function and act like an interconnected ecosystem, which is becoming really important. And I think the drivers in the industry now are so powerful that this question can no longer be ignored. So if you think about some of the initiatives that we are seeing, and some of the the very important legislation that's being made. If you think about the safety bill, all right, the safety bill is specifically talking about interoperability between different stages of the project life cycle, starting with the architect who is expected now to sort of define the standard for the data that's going to be exchanged between the various parties involved in delivering this project, and the kind of frequency with which data is expected to be surfaced, so that it can be evidenced as being compliant, and this idea that at the end of the project, you're handing over not just a physical asset, but a digital asset. And that digital asset is going to be very important and valuable for the operation of that building. So, the level of interoperability and the amount of data that's being managed now within the construction realm is just exploding. And I think another interesting point as well in terms of interoperability is between sort of technical domains, right? So we are seeing this huge acceleration in technology capability. And out in the field, topics like Stuart was talking about earlier on, they have a drone community, right, who is capturing point cloud data or essentially the reality of what's going on the site. We see people walking on site today with 360-degree cameras on their hard hats, trying to capture the reality of what's going on site. What is the interoperability potential between that set of data and other aspects of compliance within the project? Is it possible, for instance, to look at the reality capture that's happening in the field and try to, surface or extract or determine, quality cost and compliance from what's being seen. And these are the things that technologists and companies are beginning to look at, right? How do we join up all of these dots to create something that's ultimately far greater than the sum of the parts? And I think that's the challenge that we're facing with regards to interoperability.
I had to smile when you said joined up the dots. I was reminded of Bill Dots, who I think spoke at a previous COMIT webinar. And they are one of the 360-degree camera people who are, they're using not just the camera technology, but also artificial intelligence and machine learning behind the scenes to relate what's seen in the camera with what's actually in the building information model design, so that you can track how far, how compliant a design is with the expectation in the design, whether the project is on schedule, whether it's reached, whether what's been seen out in field is where they're supposed to be in the project timeline. So that's huge. There's huge opportunities there, I think, to move us forward. I think the interesting area here, also talking about, in particular, the Building Safety Act, is that it's prompted organisations that previously wouldn't have opted for digital to have to go down the digital route. Dame Judith Hackett defined her golden thread as being digital by default and needing to be interoperable, because she recognized that information needed to have longevity. And if you've got information which is trapped in a proprietary format, it's not going to have that longevity that the asset owner, operator, or the residents or occupants of a high-rise building are going to need. So, this is going to be increasingly important, and I think it's going to be increasingly important as also we start not just to address the building safety issues, but also begin to address some of the carbon issues as we move towards 2050. So these are going to be important drivers, not just of interoperability, but driving a much more digital and joined up and connected approach to industry engagement and collaboration.
Indeed, and you spoke earlier on about kind of the level of digitalization that we have within the construction space and how that compares to manufacturing and automotive and so on. And I know, it's you can have a really heated debate about whether construction can function like a manufacturer. However, the reality is that most tier one contractors are now thinking about methods of modern manufacture. They're thinking about offsite. They're thinking about the transformation of a construction environment from being a construction environment almost to an assembly facility. And I think, by the nature of that kind of evolution of our industry, interoperability just becomes, something that you can't avoid. And I think there's an awful lot to learn as well from other industries in terms of interoperability, particularly manufacturing and automotive. They have solved some of the problems that we are beginning to think about, and they've done it many, many decades ago. If you think about manufacturing and integrated supply chains, particularly in automotive as an example, they have created standards of data exchange. EDI was one of those. They will send orders for materials to be delivered within 24-hour cycles. These materials are arriving in just in time for that particular operation. And as we start to begin to transition into kind of methods of modern manufacture, and we're working with more integrated supply chains, we're going to see exactly those kind of need to have those same kind of capabilities inside of our industry, I think. So I think it's a really exciting time, in terms of what we have to do, and I think the potential to improve the productivity within our space is tremendous. And let's face it, we're not starting from a great position, right? you know, the only way is up in terms of productivity within the construction space. You know, it's well documented, it's well understood that, you know, digitalization, or productivity index, if you like. I think you mentioned this last time we spoke. I think you know, there were some reports that were circulated a few years ago that put construction just a few notches above agriculture, right?
That's right. I mean, it was the McKinsey Global Institute produced a number of reports. The first one came out was in America. It looked at the digitization of different industry sectors, and it showed construction was one above agriculture and hunting. When they did the same for Europe, construction was actually right at the bottom. You know, so we have a big opportunity to, you know, the only direction is up, as you say. If we go back, you mentioned John Egan. You know, he'd identified, I think, that there was a potential, and Latham before him, that much of what output we currently have is waste. About 30% of activity and materials are lost in our projects. And if we think about information activities, they are often hampered by poor interoperability. We have to export and import and transfer and rekey information far too often than is good for us. It is not a lean industry. It is not delivering value in an efficient way if we have to rekey the same information simply to enable exchange of information between different platforms. So, you know, that's really why we do need to move forward. I use the word platforms there, and I know that features in the title of today's webinar. And I really wanted to explore the idea of platforms a bit further, and you know, the whole ConTech construction technology sector has been, you know, has seen quite a number of organisations, Autodesk and Procore amongst others, talking about the importance of a platform-based approach. I just really like to get maybe an Archdesk view on platforms from you, Richard.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's been an explosion of the sort of the platform branding within sort of construction technology and software space, right? You've only got to walk through Digital Construction Week or any of these events, and you'll see that, right? It's almost as if everybody will have platform mentioned somewhere in the product description or in the branding. And I think it's really, you know, important to sort of take it back to first principles and just help people perhaps understand, you know, what a platform is capable of achieving. And everybody's got a platform in their pocket, right? And I think this is quite an interesting analogy. You know, your mobile phone, whether it's an Android or an iOS or any, you know, other type of mobile phone, is essentially a platform. And what makes it a platform? Well, the developer of the platform, and that's going to be, you know, Apple or Google, have essentially created an environment where other vendors, other software vendors, can create products that plug into this platform and work. And you know, we've seen this sort of, we see this every day, all right? You know, you can go to the App Store and you can have your choice of email clients, right? There are plenty of them out there. You can choose which one you want to use. It doesn't matter which one you use. It connects to your email service as long as it's got your, you know, your account details and so on and so on. It connects to your email service. It manages your emails and it just works. Same goes for your calendar application, right? There are many of them out there. You can go and choose which one you want to, and it works. And the same with the navigation software. All right, so whether you're using Waze or whether you're using Google Maps or Apple Maps, you know, it plugs in and it works. But what the platform does, which is really special, is it allows these applications to operate, but it also allows them to interconnect and interoperate. And everybody's seen this. You know, it's the scenario that I like to give is, you know, I receive an email from somebody that's inviting me to a meeting. And immediately that email is posting that invite into my calendar. So there's an interoperability between my email and my calendar, and it doesn't matter whether I'm using what calendar I'm using or what email I'm using. And then I get into the car in the morning, and I look at my diary, and it says you have an appointment with Paul, and would you like me to navigate you to that location? And I can do that, and it takes me to the meeting. But I haven't had to do anything. All right, I'm using a platform technology. I'm using applications that are connected to that platform. And it knows what to do with the data as it arrives. So it understands that I've got an email, it understands that I've got a calendar request, it knows to put the calendar request into the calendar. The calendar knows that there's a postcode associated with this location. The navigation software picks up on that and navigates me to that location. Now, that's a platform in full force, all right? Nobody is trying to configure these products to work together. They just work. And that's what a platform is designed to do. That's the magic of a platform. And just imagine that situation in the construction environment, right? Just imagine a platform environment which essentially is able to communicate with different application domains. So the platform understands how to communicate with a CDE, and it's able to exchange documents, and it understands how to communicate with a BIM tool, and it understands that the data that's contained within a BIM environment, and it allows these things to interoperate. I think that's the sort of that's the North Star, I think, that we head in for. All right, put that into the context of kind of the Safety Act and the Golden Thread. All right, which essentially starts right at the sort of the manufacturer, right, the manufacturer of a component which has some kind of relevance to safety. And this could be something really simple, like a door closer, right? Has a component with a part number and a specification. Maybe it's the torque range on the closer of the mechanism and so on. Now imagine that those attributes and those characteristics, those important parameters of that particular component can be understood and interpreted and managed by the other pieces of software that are necessary throughout the delivery of the project, right? This idea that I know what this data is, I know what to do with it, I know who needs it, and I know how to connect them together. That's the North Star, I think, in terms of interconnectivity and platform capabilities.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think the kind of nirvana that we'd like to reach is the point at which information flows almost seamlessly across contract lines, so that a bit, and the kind of approach you were talking about, I think it is built a lot on standards. I know we had some questions leading up to this webinar about standards, and one area that we should touch upon, for example, it's another analogy we can take, is the World Wide Web, the internet. Many of the email, the calendar, the navigation solutions that you talked about, Richard, connect together because the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3 Consortium, has created a complex of interconnected standards and protocols that mean the technologies all work with each other. And they're not just the web and internet technologies, but they also span into the telecoms world and into the mobile device world to enable the free flows of information. And it's kind of a very a very efficient way in which we just expect the technologies to work when we pick up these devices. And yet when we're in the construction world, we don't have that simplicity of interfacing with the technologies, and we don't have the easy flow of data between the solutions, because we're some 20 years lagging behind, because we're still reliant in many instances upon proprietary technologies which don't talk to each other. Or don't talk to each other efficiently enough. There are tools like or data models like IFC, which are intended to help streamline the flows of information, but they can be cumbersome in the way that they are sometimes used, that people will sometimes opt for exporting everything and swamping the recipient with lots of information, whereas their information requirement might have been something quite slimmed down. They don't necessarily need all of the drain the drain survey videos in order to operate the facility. Those were videos that were taken for a small function, partway at an early stage in the project. But what's needed for future operation and maintenance is often very, very different. And I think we need to be thinking how, as an industry, we start to adopt standards, preferably open ones, that enable the free flows of information between the solutions we use, so that information is created once and is capable of reuse and expansion and improvement constantly, so that we can recognize individuals' contributions, the value that they're adding to that information, and be rewarded for the value that they're creating.
Yeah, and I think that that's where platform technology really sort of shines, right? The idea that a platform is kind of almost, well, there's a couple of perspectives on platforms. A platform is independent of the applications that are connecting to it. It understands the way to communicate with them, but but it's independent of those systems. And the idea that the independent systems can still perform the job that they're designed to do, deliver all of the necessary information into the hands of the financial people, or into the hands of the operations people, or to the compliance people, or to the planners. But when you bring this data together, you channel it up into a platform environment, and you get to see all of this data in one place. Then the challenge, as you said, is how do you connect this data? How do you connect it in a way that makes sense, that allows you to see a bigger picture, that gives you value which is greater than the sum of the parts? And that's, I think, where standards play a really important role, in terms of creating just the framework around which this data hangs. And I think, my view, certainly within the construction space, IFC and this idea that, we are defining, because remember, right, we're about delivering buildings, right? This is what we do for a living, yeah? Or, okay, infrastructure, rail, I know, but let's just stick to buildings for the moment. They exist within the bounds of a perimeter fence, and the idea that, BIM, and IFC and other proprietary tools that are out there are defining every component and element and space and property of the materials that exist inside of this building, for me is a great place to start in terms of thinking about standardization, because everything else that you're doing in these other domains somehow or other relates to the building, right? You're working on a building project, so whatever you're doing in the accountancy department, somehow or other relates to this building. The costs are incurred in delivering this building, so where do you attach the costs to? And I think it's really interesting to think about what is that fabric, if you like, or what is that canvas that glues everything together and makes everything works. There are a couple of other points that I'd like to sort of just touch on in terms of platform technologies, because people talk about, okay, APIs, for the non-technical people, the language by which two software products are able to communicate, are the key. But I think what's important to realize is that point to point, one application talking to another application directly is not platform technology, right? Platform technology happens where you almost have a mediator, where you have a middle layer where each application connects to the platform, and the platform provides the mediation and understanding of the data that's being received. It delivers context, it can aggregate them together and create new levels of value that you won't see in any of these independent products alone. And then, of course, from the Archdesk perspective, we've also got this idea of a sort of single source platform, which is slightly different in some ways. It has all of the characteristics of a platform that we've just talked about. It can connect to other applications, bring data together, aggregate them together, understand how they fit. But a single source platform also has the idea of building applications inside of its own infrastructure. So it may have a BIM capability or a cost accounting capability or a document management capability, but they share the same database. So they are inherently interoperable, if you like, because the data is all contained within one sort of structure and schema. And both of these are really important. And the fascinating things about platforms, I spent a lot of time looking at platform technology and the benefits of it, is the idea that, you can sort of accelerate innovation, right? You can create an infrastructure where you don't really know where it can go, because you can add a new component into a platform, maybe a payment gateway. Remember the discussions that don't seem to be so frequent anymore about project banking. The idea that the money associated to a project is in one place, it doesn't sit with the contractor, and you release that money based upon sort of delivery of services and activity and so on. Imagine putting a payment gateway component into a platform that allows you to sort of make payments to a contractor based upon activity that relates to reality capture and contract information and compliance information. The power that you could get from connecting these things together, adding one more capability, sort of, it doesn't add one more output, it adds multiple more outputs and value. So it's really fascinating technology, and I think it's very much of the moment, and everybody that we want to talk to is looking to achieve this level of kind of interoperability and synergistic connection between these siloed, independent pieces of software, and that's where Archdesk sit in terms of what we do and the platform we provide to.
Yeah, I think the cost and payment aspects are important in this. They provide a rationale, I think, for digital transformation. If it means that you get paid sooner and you get paid with less aggravation than current transactions often take, there's a big incentive there. We could reach the point where we have smart contracts, for example, where once components are installed and are operational, the commissioning process then kicks off a payment to the relevant subcontractors and to their suppliers, so that they get paid promptly without the need for 90-day invoices or 30-day invoices or single project bank accounts. So there's a big incentive there, and I think particularly as the industry faces the threat of another recession, anything that we can do to streamline flows of money and to make construction productivity improve has got to be the step forward. I'm conscious of time.
There's so many more points to make as well, Paul. We've got about another half an hour on this easily, couldn't we?
We could go on.
I will interject, actually. I will make one point because I think it's important. Because I know that we had a lot of questions before the event about standards and so on. And, we've talked about, open standards as opposed to sort of trying to align around a proprietary kind of, pseudo standard, if you like. But I think standardization is also really important at the level of data as well. And sometimes this can be so simple, you just don't see the wood for the trees. If everybody talks the same language, you can achieve great things, right? You could put three geniuses in a room together, but if one speaks Chinese, one speaks English, and one speaks German, right? They're not going to achieve much, right? So it's idea that if we speak the same language, we can create so much more value. And I think we see. I've been reading reports recently from leaders of some significant construction companies talking about standardizing naming conventions and so on. And this is really important, all right? I think IFC has done it to a certain degree with kind of the components that you see and the elements that you see. But things like Uniclass and so on, and talking the same language is really important. And I'll give you a really quick example. My time with mobile technology in the construction space, right? Essentially, we were telling somebody to go task management, defect snagging, tell somebody to go somewhere and do something. And the somewhere needed to be standardized, right? It needed to be something that everybody understood, and so they could get to the right place to be able to deal with this. The tell somebody was quite interesting as well. So this is really simple, right? One project would call the painter, or the package would be called the painter. One project would call them the decorator. One project would call them the painter and decorator. So you end up collecting a whole host of data relating to painting surfaces and the quality of painting surfaces. But the data was split into kind of, all right, this is a painter's work, this is a decorator's work, this is a painter and decorator's work. And it takes somebody to sort of bring this together and say, actually, all these things are the same thing, right? So if you're asked at, you know, at the enterprise level, what is our best performing sort of trade category and what is our least performing trade category? It's difficult to answer that question unless you're talking in a consistent and standardized language, right? And so I think standards from a language perspective and from a naming convention are really important too. And if you get that right, you get the power of AI and machine learning that can work with you as well. Because in order for these things to work really effectively, data needs to be labeled properly. So there's so many things that can come together that sort of just oil the wheels of interoperability and synergistic systems working together that I think we need to consider. So yeah, I'll stop with that one.
Can I just jump in, Richard? Thanks for a great perspective. Well, both of you actually. I know you've sort of been wheedling away through the list, Paul, the list of questions, but I've got a couple of questions I'd like to sort of bring in from the floor, from the attendees today. And one of them is Andy. I don't know whether you can see these guys. I'll read it out. Andy has thrown in a question, and apologies, Andy, we haven't got to this sooner, because I know you asked it 20 minutes ago, but given the description of a platform, what's the difference between this and an operating system? I think you sort of touched on that a little bit, Paul, but do you want to pick that up?
I was going to say, Richard used the operating system when he was talking about Google or Android and iOS. I alluded to platforms in the sense that there are some vendors who are offering a kind of platform approach where you can maybe take, for example, Autodesk's approach, and they have a community of developers who are building related solutions that plug into the Autodesk Construction Cloud. So there are different ways in which platforms can be described. There is also an emerging concept through the Government and Industry Interoperability group. We have a project, a work stream there called the Information Management Platform. And this is really pointing at the technologies which are deployed by an asset owner organization to connect all of their information systems, enterprise systems, so they can take information, for example, from project delivery, from what might be described as a CDE, capture that information, keep it as a part of an immutable file store, so they've kept the audit trail, but extract, transfer and load some of that data for use in enterprise facilities and asset management systems. So, you know, there are different ways in which the platform can be defined. Richard, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, actually, you know, I paused for thought for a second and think, how do we answer this? And I think I'll try to answer it perhaps a little bit more from the technical perspective. You know, an operating system is something like Windows, right? Or you know, okay, I described a mobile phone as you know, it has an operating system which is Google, and it also has platform characteristics. But I think just from a technical perspective, you know, an operating system is very often from a technology stack perspective, it's very, very close to the metal, if you like. You know, it's dealing with kind of, you know, how do I communicate with, you know, the hardware, with the storage? How do I communicate with the internet? You know, it's really dealing with kind of very low-level operations that make this computer work. Whereas a platform is essentially an application layer that sits on top of it, right? And when I talk about platform, I'm really talking about technology that is able to create an interconnection between two different types of applications that have distinct types of data and bring them together in some way which creates context. Whereas I think with the operating, for me, an operating system is quite close to the metal and is really sort of, you know, managing the kind of foundations, if you like, on which this thing is operating and running. So maybe a slightly different perspective, but yeah, that's how I would answer that. It's a really interesting question.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. Andy, I hope that answers your question. If not, just follow up down below. So I've got another question here, and this is from Sue. Thank you, Sue. Software companies will not work towards interoperability if their business model involves tying clients into their software by locking in their information.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to take that one? I'm sure that's got a bit for both of you. Subject. Oh.
Well, that's noisy. Is that Paul?
Yeah, Paul, is there a problem with your microphone there?
Whilst Paul tries to fix that, and maybe I'll give you my perspective on that one. So, Sue, another great question. I think, yeah, this is to a certain degree commercial, because there's some aspect of commercial reality, right? People, I've seen it myself firsthand. There's a kind of inherent reluctance to collaborate and cooperate because there's some perceived risk of threat. From my perspective, I just think it's a kind of philosophy that's pretty much outdated. And I don't think that companies who take that position are going to be able to sort of continue to grow and thrive in the long term. You know, I think we've gotten to a position, to a point, you know, particularly within our industry, you know, within the construction sector specifically, where the level of interoperability demands are so high, you know, and some of them are beginning to be legislated against, like, you know, aspects of the safety bill and golden thread, that just mean that you just can't sustain that kind of position anymore. You know, we live in an interconnected, interoperable world, and if you want to continue to be isolated and independent, then ultimately, you know, you will, I guess the business will reap the consequences of that decision. My view is that there's no longevity in that. Paul? It's definitely Paul. Paul's in the toilet with something.
No, Paul, there's something wrong with your microphone. I don't know whether you'll be able to, I don't know, just change to a different setup.
Keep on firing the questions away. I'll try to do my best while Paul gets to sound a little bit better.
Okay,
Stuart.
So the next one I've got is from Victor, and Victor says, what is the best tool to connect a BIM model to a digital twin?
I don't have a specific answer for that, right? But I'm really interested in the question. Okay. For me, a BIM and a digital twin are not that different. And in fact, I would say that a digital twin is going to exhibit all of the characteristics, so it's going to contain all of the characteristics and the data that's contained within the BIM model, but it's going to add a new aspect of dynamics to it. So, for instance, you know, if you take you know, and that adds significant value, right? So, if you take, you know, a BIM and just think of it in terms of, and I've had this conversation with a few people, and it's really a really interesting conversation. And again, I don't really know what the answer is here, but some people have said to me, well, BIM is very static, and I, you know, and I think, well, okay, well, it should be, right? Because, and hear me out here, because when you hand over the building, it's a relatively static building in terms of its components and materials, all right? You know, the radiator is static, it doesn't move, it has a specification, it's relatively static. I get that. So the kind of the data schema that's defining what's contained inside of a building from a BIM perspective is relatively static. But when you move to a digital twin, in my opinion, that's when you begin to start thinking about the dynamics that are contained within it as well. And, you know, for me, you know, digital twin isn't a photorealistic representation of the building. I think that's an idea that has been, I don't know, I don't think that's quite what we're looking for. A digital twin for me is the building and all of its dynamics. So for instance, you know, all of the information related to the volumetric spaces, that relates to the heating capacity, that relates to the power output of the boiler systems that are going to heat that particular area, or the movement of people through the building, or the, you know, the light levels in the building, or the emissions of the building, you know, all of the dynamics that go around it. So I think, to answer the question, I don't have an exact question in terms of use this product to do this, but I think there's quite a distinct difference between, you know, there's distinct differences between a BIM and a digital twin, but I think a digital twin will inherit all of the characteristics of the BIM model as part of its being.
Well, all right. Well, thanks for that, Richard. Victor, I hope that answers your question. But going back to the previous question, I want to bring Paul back in. How do you, Mike?
Swap mics. Is that better?
That's fantastic. Yeah. Wall to wall.
Just to go back on, yes, yeah, on the vendor lock-in question. From the government and industry interoperability group's perspective, we've taken guidance from the Digital Data and Technology Playbook, which is a guide for government procurers, and they are very, you know, that it says in black and white, they are seeking to be technology agnostic to avoid vendor lock-in. And so solutions which proprietary solutions which try to perpetuate lock-in would increasingly not be considered as part of a procurement process. So, you know, they are on a hiding to nothing if they try to persist with that approach. And it's something that, you know, we're starting to see a kind of convergence in some areas of software development, as firms do start to adopt more open approaches, recognizing that they have to rise to what the ultimate client is demanding in terms of their information requirements.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope that answers the question, Sue. If not, I've just had a little bit at the bottom. It is an emotive subject, I know, okay. Listen, we're just over time, and I want to finish up. But one thing I did save to the end was the questions at registration. There was 3 questions, if you remember. What does the term software platform mean to you? How would you rate software interoperability? And would you consider your company's information management, or when you consider your company's information management, how much is still dependent on paper? So let me bring that slide up, and we'll just give that. We'll just speak to that for a second before we close out. But appreciate everybody hanging on. Thank you. So here's the slide. Advance. There we are. So, guys, do you want to very quickly give us a brief overview of what you see percentage-wise? And that's exactly as they came out of the machine.
Oh, yeah, it's very good. Very good data.
I don't know why they didn't put it in order, but that's the way it appeared. So.
I think we have a very informed audience here, actually, and I'm really surprised that, you know, it's great to see that there's an understanding of what platform technology means. You know, this idea that bringing, you know, independent systems together to be able to connect and interact, and obviously big score there. Great. It's great that understanding is out there.
Yeah, I'm struck by the second. I'm struck by the second one because it's clear that something like 60% of the responses rank it okay or less. You know, if we were working in a manufacturing world with integrated supply chains, it would be probably 90% excellent and 10% other than excellent. We're a long way from reaching where manufacturing is.
And my point on 2 would be that's exactly what we are experiencing and listening to when we speak to our customers today. Because every conversation is about how do we get more from our information, and how do we connect these independent systems together. So yeah, that's an interesting substantiation, if you like, of how much more we can do, I think.
Yeah. I think the last one on paper. Yeah, the last one on paper, I mean, we've got something like a quarter saying that a lot of their information management, either quite a lot or the majority of their information management, is still dependent on paper. This is a very disparate industry with a lot of SMEs. I think the transition away from paper is going to be dependent upon finding technologies which are simple to use as paper, as simple to use as a mobile device, so that the onus isn't upon the user to be supremely technologically proficient. The technology just works, and they become digital natives just by virtue of using the technology on a constant basis. So this is a challenge for the technology providers to become as ubiquitous as paper.
Yeah, there's probably a need for some encouragement there as well with supply chains, because I know sometimes systems won't be changed because the supply chain, the trusted supply chain, haven't advanced, and I think there's maybe an element of cajolement, or I won't say mandatory, but encouragement is probably a better word, to bring them along, because their own systems are held up because the supply chain won't catch up fast enough.
Just my perspective on that third point, it would be great. 20% of those companies think that they're telling us hardly any dependency on paper. That's great, right? But
isn't it?
I think there's just one other perspective on that from me. I spent almost 20 years trying to sort of encourage people to move away from clipboards, pens, and paper in a construction environment to using a digital tool instead. And the interesting thing is that sometimes when people think about, okay, how can I take away my paper and move to a digital model, sometimes there's a lot of different perspectives on this, but sometimes it's easy to just say, okay, I just want an electronic version of exactly what I've got on a piece of paper. All right, okay, it makes things a bit quicker, but it doesn't necessarily add any more significant value. I think sometimes when you think about re-engineering from paper into a digital world, you really need to think about not just the contents of that piece of paper, but what is the information that's on that paper? How is it meaningful? Where does it need to go? And think about re-engineering the process as opposed to just re-engineering the medium of exchange. Even though there's huge value by improving the medium of exchange, there's a lot more value from improving the whole process and looking at the data and what it can do for you as well.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so I just want to swiftly move on and close out. Just one response, Victor. Victor's from a university in, I think it's Germany. I think I might be correct, in Germany.
That's great. We've got an international audience there. That's fantastic.
He wants to connect with you two. I've said that's okay. Connection through LinkedIn. So I'm sure he's already looked you up.
Thank you very much, Victor.
Thanks for joining. Victor. Thanks for your participation today as well. I'll come on to everybody else in a second. But thanks for the involvement in the questions. I want to say a big thank you to the webinar sponsors. Without them, we couldn't arrange these sessions as we do. So that's Virgin Media O2 and Snugs, both members of COMIT. Yes, the past recordings, get this question every time. They're available through the website. You should get a notification by in the next couple of days of this recording. And just follow us through the social media channels. I want to say thanks to our production team. So that's Jerry on the call. Ian's not with us today. Thank you very much for your support and drive and enthusiasm. Thank you to yourselves, Richard, Paul, thank you. And also thank you very much to the attendees. Quite a few called in, sorry, quite a few registered for this, quite a few on the call. Thank you very much. Great questions as well. We have another session at the end of September, which is entitled The Digital Logbook of Legacy Assets, Foundation for a Digital Twin Future. That's going to be delivered by YourCAD and a select panel. So please do tune in for that one. And one other announcement I need to make is the next Community Day is held on the 6th of October, and that's going to be held at Nifty Lift in Milton Keynes. Supported by Sunbelt. If you want to come along to that, then reach out to me. That's my email address there. So I'm just going to say thank you very much once again. Before I close out, just round the room, only a small room today, but Paul, any other comments to add before we close up?
No, thanks very much, everybody, and thanks for the questions. Thanks for your attention.
Richard?
Yes, Stuart. No, thank you very much for giving us the time to talk today. Really enjoyed it. It's great to see COMIT going from strength to strength. You know, I was there at the very beginning, if you remember, and it's just fantastic that we're still a growing, vibrant organisation, and it's great to be here with you. So thank you very much, Stuart.
You were indeed. You were indeed. And I remember the day very well. Thank you very much for your support. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.
Fantastic. Cheers. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.